Hi there, I'm Nicole. Welcome back. You'll see we have yet a new lighting scenario today. I just set up my home office, which I'm super excited about. I'm going to show you my setup soon. But today we are talking all about Scribophile. You need beta readers as a writer. You want to see what other people think of your thing. What do you do? What if you don't know any writers? Well, someone came up with Scribophile, which is meant to help you solve this problem. It's basically meant to help you get beta readers for your story. Now, I've had the premium membership on Scribophile for about 2 years now, and I am sharing my experience today and how you can get the most out of the site. So, Scribophile is an online community. You have to register for an account, and it's basically a little writing economy. It runs on things called karma points. So you can post your own work to a main spotlight to get basically strangers, other writers, to give you their critiques on the work that you're posting. Posting a work costs 5 karma points. You earn karma points by critiquing other people's work. There are a lot of other elements of the website. There are writing groups, there are forum boards. You can also post to a personal or beta reader spotlight, which I assume is good if you're ingrained in the community. I have never used those, and I don't really look at the forums, although I do use the groups. There's a lot there, but the basic part of it is you earn points by critiquing others' works, and then you use your points to post your own work and get feedback on it. If you post it into the main spotlight, you're guaranteed 3 long critiques, which means critiques over 125 words. Now, let's talk about the good thing about Scribophile is that people will read your work and you will get opinions. You are guaranteed that when you post to the spotlight. Now, there are a lot of things that make people uncertain about using the website, or it's not for them. This isn't like an advertisement or anything. I'm just sort of sharing my experience and giving tips to get the best experience out of it. So the number one biggest thing that you hear about or that you worry about is the quality of the critiques and reviews that you get. So as I said before, to get karma points on a critique, the person has to have a critique of at least 125 words. Now that isn't super long. Most end up being around between 125 and 200, but I've also gotten a lot of really long critiques, like 600 words, 1,500 words, 1,000 words. I've gotten people give me really, really good in-depth feedback. Sometimes you really just don't have that much to say, and the 177 word critique is incredibly valuable, and sometimes, you get those longer ones. It's really kind of a crapshoot, but a lot of them are longer than the minimum. There are also very clear community guidelines about what should be in those critiques, and that a critique contains actionable and helpful feedback. If it doesn't contain actionable feedback, if it's just, oh, ha ha ha, this is so good, or like, this sucks, then those are not critiques, those are comments. Now, there are a couple of different ways, I suppose, to give critiques. They can either be inline, where people can put comments right in the writing. They can be freeform, or they can kind of address, there's like a template to talk about different areas, like the characters, the plot. Most people do inline. That's kind of the default, and I agree that it's a lot easier for a critiquer to do inline because you can you only have to read it once. Basically, you read and you give inline comments as you go, but sometimes if I've asked specifically for overall feedback, I have gotten it. So I have really gotten some amazingly helpful feedback here that's really helped my revisions. I have a few case studies that I could give if I wanted to. I'll talk to them maybe more at the end of the video. I also posted the first chapter of 1837 here way back in November when I was at a point where I was like, oh, do I even want to write this? Is it even worth it? Is it even an interesting story? So I posted the first chapter-ish. It was a bit abbreviated to fit within the word count, about 3,000 words, and I posted it on there to see reactions, and I got some really great feedback. It was incredibly encouraging and kind with sort of ideas for how to go forward. It was just wonderful, and I was like, okay, this isn't a terrible idea. People were seemingly very interested in the Canadian history aspect. They thought it was intriguing, and so I said, okay, give me enough motivation to push forward. Now that's the good stuff. You will, though, get bad critiques, probably. If you post more than, if you post, you will probably get critiques, bad critiques. No critique I've ever gotten has ever been mean. Critical, yes. Thorough, yes. Not understanding my story or the character or what I was going for, yeah. And that's okay. I've never gotten a mean critique. I've heard rumors about them, but I've never experienced it myself. I have gotten critiques that are just not useful, or ones where it's clear they only read like the first 2 paragraphs and then they stopped. So there's a way you can deal with this. It's called you report the bad critiques. There's a report button. They ask you for the reason. You can give a little bit of explanation, and then the moderators will look at that report, and if they agree with you, they will make that critique a comment, or if it's like abusive or something, they'll delete it altogether, and they'll put your work back in the spotlight for no karma points and get you another critique. I have actually done this 2 or 3 times. It doesn't always feel good because, as I said, I've never gotten a mean critique. I got a critique once where the person basically just said that I was mixing, this was on 1837, they said I was mixing modern and historical language and it was confusing, which I was, and it is, I agree. But that one sentence was helpful, and then all the rest of it was explaining the origins of the word all right and why or why not you should spell it A-L-R-I-G-H-T versus A-L-L space R-I-G-H-T. And I said, man, that's not actionable, so I felt kind of bad, but I did report it. And then I had someone else who, it was their first critique, and the critique was an okay length, I think. But it was very clear they only read the first little bit of the story and they didn't go any further. So I did report that critique, and I actually messaged them too to tell them what they did wrong. And then I felt really bad because they went back and they edited their comment, what was a critique and now became a comment, and they made it so long. That was the one that was 1,500 words. It was super thorough, and they apologized so much, and I was like, oh no. And then I got another critique on top of that because the reporters agreed with me that they had only read the first paragraph, but then they went back and read it. So that one, I feel like I should have either messaged or reported. That's a good lesson. But anyways, the report function works. If you think you need to use the report function, think it through for a second. You don't want to be the boy who cried wolf. Read through the community guidelines and really ask yourself, does this fit the criteria? If it's a critique, it's not necessarily mean. If you don't like what they are saying, that doesn't mean it's a bad critique. It's just when it doesn't fit those very specific guidelines that they ask you to do in your critiques. So what do you expect from these critiques? Well, lots of people will get nitpicky with sort of grammar and wording and such. If you don't want that to happen, you have to give critique guidance and be specific, and I'm going to give some examples of good critique guidance in a minute. You don't know who the feedback is coming from, which is, I suppose, the biggest disadvantage. These people could be published, or they could be 12 years old. No offense if you're 12 years old, that's great. I think that the best feedback you can get from Scribophile really is the reader's feelings and reactions to the characters and the plot and to what's going on. I always ask them to sort of point out where they're confused or where they have questions, or highlight their emotions and their thoughts as they read. That's the most helpful to me because I know my own reactions, and if I know what their reactions are, I can make their reactions sort of fit my reactions by changing the text. One of the best reviews I ever got, it's a short story that was kind of a stream of conscience type thing. It was a very dreamlike quality, and the person who was critiquing it thought that it was Southern Gothic, and in the end the character in the short story murdered the girls in the hotel room next door. That is not what happened. So I got a lot of good feedback on that story that really led me to edit it and change it and make it less dreamy because you needed a little bit of stuff to ground you. But reading that, I was like, okay, this is so not clear the way I thought it was clear. So they had no idea what it was about. Completely missed the mark, and it was the most helpful feedback I think I've ever gotten. And it's also so fun just to get their feedback, because people get into your characters and they talk about the people in your head while they're still kind of in there, and it's really, really cool. So then comes the question of how much do you actually have to critique to get one critique of your own? The way Karma Points works, it usually ends up to be about 4 critiques per posting one of your works in the spotlight. Your posting one work has to be about 3,000 words, so usually it's like 2 scenes or a chapter of a story. Critiquing about 4 works, it might be 3 if you write super duper long critiques. Basically, to put this in perspective, I have over 40,000 words up on Scribophile, and I have about 20,000 critique words. So I'm still getting double the number of words critiqued as I have critiqued. I also generally write like long, thorough critiques that hit around like the 500, 600, 800 word mark. So some people might have less or more. I find the critiquing actually to be a benefit though, because by critiquing other people's work, especially like amateur writers, you kind of learn what's not working and how you can fix it. And by critiquing, I've really become a better writer. Don't critique stories that you know nothing about. Try to go after ones that you will enjoy or ones that are in genres you know. One thing is, it's so easy to want to critique the poetry because everything else is like 3,000 words, 3,500 words, and then you see the poetry and it's like 150 words. And so I always click on it and then I stare at it and I'm like, I have nothing to say about this. I can't think of anything to say. So if you really don't know how to critique something, don't. Just pass it over because it's not really fair to that person. Another tip for critiquing: when you're critiquing novels, read the synopsis provided. So they can really only do a chapter at a time and you're not expected to read the whole book, but they will provide sort of a synopsis overall to give you an idea of where you are in the story, because I know it can be frustrating for people who've posted novels. I never have, but if you're so confused about things that were in the synopsis. And that brings me to my point about length. So you are limited to 3,000 words. There is no guarantee, even if you put up 20 chapters of a novel that are all 3,000 words, that one person will read all of those chapters in the same order. In fact, it is probably very unlikely that that will happen. I don't think it's worth it to try to put up a whole full-length novel on Scribophile. It is very unlikely that any one person will read the whole thing. So any sort of macro opinions about the story arcs, the character arcs, how the plot goes, the surprises, you're not going to get them. If you want to get micro into sort of line editing, then sure, maybe it's useful, but I really don't think it's worth it. I have put up short stories, scenes, and excerpts from novels that are really giving me trouble, any sort of small pieces that I want feedback on, and that's worked really well for me. I've been very happy with the results that I've gotten from that. People do post novels and they keep posting them. I suppose if you have sort of a community of people that you know on the website and you all kind of read each other's novels, then yeah, it could be really, really worth it. If you don't, and you're just kind of putting up your novel, I don't think you're going to get the same benefit from it that you would have if you just gave it to one beta reader. Another thing is, the shorter the work, the better the critique generally. They suggest about 3,000 words, and I suggest sticking to that if you can. That series of short stories that I talked about, the Christmas ones, I purposely made them all about 3,000 words, partially because I didn't want to get too long, but partially because I wanted to put them on Scribophile for feedback, and I knew that that was my goal, so I purposely wrote them to be that size. Okay, now here are my overall tips for how you can get the most out of this website. Number 1, join writing groups for genres and things that are of interest to you, and enter the contests. So I joined this First Sentence writing group, and they have a monthly or bi-monthly contest where they post a picture and you write a first sentence. I actually won one of those, and I won 20 karma points, which is posting 4 works in a spotlight, which is crazy. So entering contests, you can actually skip around having to do a ton of critiques, and it's so helpful. Tip number 2 is follow the community guidelines strictly when you're posting and when you're critiquing, and report them when they're not being followed. Tip number 3 is you have to enjoy critiquing to enjoy this website. If you don't like reading other people's stories, if you do not like critiquing them, if you're just doing it to get through it and you're not going to kind of enjoy the learning process, don't use Scribophile. Like doing the critiquing and you will like the whole thing. Number 4 is understand why you're posting it, what kind of feedback you want, and make that clear by giving succinct and clear critique guidance. And here are some examples of critique guidance that I've given. Thoughts on title? ? I'm very interested to know if you're following what's going on. Do you need more physical details or is enough context provided? Also, I know there is a lot of description. I like the description, but would love to have the places where it's unclear or too much highlighted. I'm interested in the parts you find interesting, boring, emotional, confusing, etc., as well as any line editing, ways to make the writing better in general. So that was the 3rd or 4th time I posted that stream of consciousness piece, so I knew what the faults were after I got that Southern Gothic problem critique, and I was trying to figure out if I rectified it and how it was going. This guidance is from when I posted the first scenes of 1837. Any feedback is welcome, but line edits are really not helpful for me at this stage, as I expect I will completely rewrite these scenes in a few weeks. Most valuable would be your thoughts on: are the characters interesting? Do you like them? Do you find the start intriguing or boring? Were you confused at any point? Did anything feel cliche or heavy-handed? Thank you, smiley face. Give clear critique feedback, and I've found that people are generally fairly good about following it, which I love. All right, tip number 5, I think we're on 5, is thank your critiquers. There's lots of ways to do it. I think you get extra karma points for having likes and certain reactions on your critiques, so just spread the love and make sure you thank them. And number 6 is digesting the feedback itself. Now remember that I said you don't know who it's coming from. Everybody's gonna have a different opinion. No one's going to have universal popularity for their story. That's one of the problems with Scribophile, is that you're not necessarily getting critiques from your target audience. So you have to sort of take each individual critique as somewhat of, not as a grain of salt, but take it with that understanding in mind that they might not be your target audience, they might not have read what you're trying to go for, and that's totally okay. Their feedback can still be very useful to you. The biggest thing to do though is to look for themes in the feedback. Try to find overall themes, things where, if 2 people say the same thing, or if everybody critiquing says the same thing, then it's probably true and you should change that thing. If it's one person and you don't agree with it, it's not the be-all end-all. Consider it, but you don't have to make any changes. So overall, I think that Scribophile is super helpful, especially for short stories, shorter works, line edits, and for people who really like critiquing. I hope this video was helpful. If you haven't gone to it, I encourage you go check it out. Just give one round, write a couple critiques, post a work, just see what your experience is. I'd love to hear about your own experiences. If you are on Scribophile, I have included my profile in the bottom there, so feel free to, I don't think you can friend people, but shoot me a message or whatever on Scribophile. And thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time.